if nobody opposes, we can move on to item number 5 and get into the meat of this. Get the crowd all worked up. Item number 5 is an update on the state of wells in Penn Valley, groundwater, and how much or how little there may or may not be. And with us, we have Jerry Murphy from Peters Drilling and Pump Service in Grass Valley to give us an informational presentation. And with that, I will hand it over to Jerry.
How y'all doing today?
Excellent. Thank you for being here, Jerry.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
No, a few of you recognize a few of the names on here. See a few people that I've known for many years here. But on the wells, it's you know, we're in a drought this year that's similar to the one we had back in 1976. 1977 was the worst drought, I believe, in Nevada County history, that on record in Nevada County history, and this is second to that, very close second. And we're having the same types of problems that we had back in 1976 and 1977. Some of the shallower wells are the ones that are affected first, and I'm talking wells that are, you know, 40 feet, 50 feet deep to 80 feet deep. It's water that runs on top of the hard rock, what we would call kind of confined aquifers, very small confined aquifers. And the volcanic layers that going up by the 5 Mile House, that 5 Mile Ridge, all of the volcanic stuff has always been, the production of those wells have always been directly related to the amount of snowfall and rainfall we have. So it's what we would call local recharge. But most of the wells in Nevada County come out of the granite structure, or the black shale, or what we call Browns Valley greenstone. And that water comes from, there's all different theories of where that comes from, but it is not affected as much by a year-to-year basis on what happened the previous year or the previous year before that. It could be 7 years ago we had a drought and it's taken that long for water to travel underground, and we could have 2 really good years of rain in a row, and all of a sudden we have wells that are, you know, we're still deepening wells. But when we look at the numbers, and I spent some time, probably 7 or 8 years ago during a drought, and I did it again today, where I looked at all the numbers of the percentage of wells I deepen every year. And so in 2018, it was 10%. In 2019, it was 10%. In 2020, it was 8.14%. And in 2021, it's 11.1%. So that's a percentage of my work. So I don't, you know, we don't see this huge increase of wells that we're deepening. It always seems to be that 10% plus or minus 1%. And I could go back years and years and years, and it's going to be within 1% of that 10%. The number that we deepen wells every year. That's just the wells that we drill in a 4-county area that I'm using. I'm not going through the county site. They could probably pull numbers, Trinity or somebody like that there could pull all of the well deepenings they get and compare it on a yearly basis. But I think it would be very close to that percentage because we drill a large percentage of the wells in Nevada County. The difference is what's going on now is we have a lot more straws in the ground than we've ever had before. And we continue to put more straws in the ground. And we have a lot of the wells that would normally, usually the bulk of the wells that we would be drilling would be for domestic use. Where they're domestic wells. So you're drawing out of a domestic well somewhere between 300 and 500 gallons a day out of a domestic well for household use. You know, that's your lawn, that's washing your car, your washing machine, you know, clothes, all that type of stuff, dishwasher. And if it's actually closer to 200 and something for most people, because there's a lot of retired people in Nevada County and they're a lot more conservative with their water. But if you look at it, or, you know, a number that you're going to get off the internet or something like that, they peg it at about 400 gallons per household. And a lot of these wells nowadays that are being drilled for ag purposes. And they're drawing, 10,000 gallons a day or 11,000 or 12,000 gallons a day out of these wells that are not really designed to pump that kind of water. I mean, for ag use in this county, it's always been surface water. NID surface water is what has always been, for the bulk of the ag industry in Nevada County, it's been surface water, NID raw water. That's what it's piped here for. So I don't know what that's going to do to the numbers in a long-term effect. We just don't know. Right now, we don't see anything drastic, as far as the numbers of amount of wells that we're deepening or the amount of wells that we have to replace. I don't see a huge uptick. What I do see is the problem, the traffic jam is that the amount of wells that we have to drill is just gone out of sight. And what's happened is CARB, the Airborne Resources, started about 25 years ago with these clean engines, and they gave everybody 20 years to clean up their engines, to buy newer equipment, to have cleaner engines and all of that type of stuff. And a lot of companies decided, I'm not going to do that. And so they got to a point where they got put out of business. So you have 50% of the drillers gone that aren't in the industry to cover the amount of wells being drilled in Nevada County, Placer County, Yuba County, and Butte County. So you've taken that, and then out of the 50% of the drillers that spent literally millions of dollars to comply with the state of California, their fleets are down 50% because they had to sell, like us, we had 6 drill rigs at one time. Well, you can't take the newer rigs that comply, these tier 4 engines are extremely expensive. So to comply, we had to sell 2 rigs to get 1, 2 rigs to get 1, 2 rigs to get 1. So we have three pieces of equipment instead of 6. So you've taken the amount of people in the industry that can handle this load, and that's why there's this backup all through the whole state of California. You see, oh, well drillers are 9 months to a year behind. Yeah, well, there's only 50% of us left, if that. And so that's what's creating a problem on the wells that do go dry. Is usually, a few years ago, someone calls with a dry well, usually within 2 weeks, we can be in there and we can remedy the situation, maybe a month on a busy year. And now we just don't have the equipment to do that. We're just so backed up. We're months behind on getting to houses that do come up against that 10% that come up against a well that has slowed way down or has just quit producing altogether. So if there's any questions, I hope that makes sense to you.
Larry, are you seeing any issues with water quality from the drought?
Water quality, yes. As you start pumping wells down, if wells slow down a little bit and your static levels change in your well. So if you have a well, let's say that's 300 feet deep, and on a normal year, your static level is around 60 feet, and your static level varies between 80 feet and 60 feet when you're doing normal household chores and you're watering your garden or whatever you've got, your lawn or flower beds. But it has a fluctuation, and when static levels go down, and all of a sudden, instead of an 80-foot static level, when your pump turns on, your static level is dropping maybe down to 180 feet. Well, you're drawing oxygen into the well. And when that oxygen goes into the well in the hard rock structure, it oxidizes the iron, it oxidizes the manganese. You get more calcium buildup in the water. So as it draws the water level, I don't know if you can see, but if it draws the water level down in the well, when the water level comes back up in the well at night, it picks up the iron, the manganese, that type of stuff. So our filtration guy has been pulling his hair out, trying to recalibrate the system so that they're pulling more iron out and that type of stuff. And that happens every year to a certain extent from May through about June or July. Everything stays pretty static, but then the statics usually start dropping in August or September, and then we have to recalibrate some of these systems for to taking the iron out. Recharge in Nevada County normally would be in February. We do have pretty good statistics on that. When the mine was trying to go in, I don't know, last time 15, 20 years ago, they do a lot of studies, and the recharge in the hard rock structure was almost to like clockwork at the beginning of February, end of January, beginning of February is when the static levels would start coming up. You would think it would be different, but that's literally, they had probes in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wells around Nevada County and around the mine. So up around Grass Valley, Nevada City, Greenhorn Road, not Chicago Park, but Cedar Ridge, that area there, all the way around the mine. And that's I think a pretty reliable number.
Jerry, can you tell me
how much does the mine affect the water? If the mine was emptied, I keep on hearing about all this stuff possibly happening. How does that affect people's wells?
I honestly don't think anybody knows. The last time we did something like that was up at Siscon Gold. And Siscon Gold up on the San Juan Ridge, they hit they were in a shale formation up there, and they hit a pocket of water up there where they were pumping out something like 1 million gallons of water a day, and it used the wells 2 miles away, 3 miles away. The 6-inch wells that we had drilled were being used as vents. They literally started sucking air because the water was being drawn out of the ground at such a rate that 2 to 3 miles away, in whole clusters of wells, they were sucking air. So that mine was 180 feet deep or 200 feet deep or something like that. I don't remember. It's Siscon Gold. You could look it up. It's all clearly recorded. I think the static level of the mine is somewhere around 300 feet. I think if they pulled out thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of gallons, they say that it's not going to affect wells. I have a hard time believing, looking at the history of what has happened up in North San Juan Ridge. I think that I don't know that anybody knows the answer to that question. I don't think you'll know until they start pumping the mines out, if they ever got to that point.
Well, you might have just answered.
I certainly don't know, but I would hedge a bet that it would affect some wells. It did last.
I think you've sort of answered my question, which was going to be, how often would you say you run up against one of these wells that's run dry, and it's a result of, I'll call it overuse or excessive use or elevated use from somebody else in the area, where so somebody in the neighborhood's using up all the water? Is that as prevalent as it seems like it might be?
It's beginning to be. It's beginning to be where we'll go into a neighborhood where there is a lot of agricultural stuff going on. They do not have surface water. And the shallower wells in that neighborhood, we are getting calls to deepen them, and or they are hauling water to supplement the water that they aren't getting out of their well. If they can haul water once a month, pick up 4,000 gallons of water, and they can keep the rest of it up at the well, they're being creative about it. But yes, I think that is going to be a problem and is beginning to be a problem. How big of a problem? Once again, this is the first time we've run up against this to this magnitude because of the we are, I don't know how many counties allow commercial grows, but on all of our commercial buildings, all of our public wells and commercial wells that we do, all of that water is metered, so they know how much water these places are using. When you get in states like Oregon and a lot of other states, you're limited to a 10-gallon a minute pump in a domestic well to try to prevent people from over pumping wells. We have been adamant with the people that we're talking to as far as the ag industry, and trying to be upfront with them that, you know, you get a 20 gallon a minute well, you shouldn't pump more than say between 5 and 10 gallons a minute out of that well in a 24-hour period. The wells have to have some type of a recharge. And that comes with a figure from the state. The state says 25% to about 50%, depending on, you know, you'd have to do some really, you'd have to do some well tests and drawdown tests and static tests to see what would actually be, whether they would allow you to do 25% or 50%. On all of the public wells in Nevada County, the percent of water that they can use out of their well depends on a well test done that's a 72-hour well test, or some of these well tests go even longer than that. But a 72-hour test, you can use 25% of that well's total GPM is what the state will allow you to use out of that well. So if you did a 7-day test and the well holds up, they'll allow you to use 50% of that well's total gallons per minute. Is that understandable?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So the state regulates that on public wells, on commercial wells and public wells.
Oh, okay, commercial. And so how are commercial and public wells like regulated, or their usage rates monitored?
They're all metered.
Oh, they're metered. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're all metered, and they, you know, they have to turn in the numbers on a quarterly basis, and those wells are actually tested for, you know, they usually do some type of a real estate panel. It's a little bit more than that to make sure that they're not bringing in, you know, arsenic and those types of things. It's been going on for years, and those wells hold up very well.
Are you using analog or mechanical meters, or are we into smart meters on wells now, or what kind of meter are we talking about? No,
these are meters. The meters that are installed on those public water systems are just the same ones NID's using. They come up and go through a meter, and you read gallons on them. There are some stuff when they were doing the testing for the mine, they were putting down these probes down into these wells, and the probe could tell, you know, the amount of static pressure above them. They were very expensive. I want to say those probes were $1,200 a piece or something like that. And they had them in, and they would send electronically to a database when they had quite a few of those out for a long time to monitor the wells that were around Idaho, Maryland, and Brunswick. I don't remember if those were analog or the other, because I don't know the difference. I probably do, but I'd have to ask Siri.
I guess my last question for the time being would be, is there ever a time when is drilling deeper always the answer, or has there ever been a time, or how often is there a time when you get to somebody's place and their well's dry and you have to tell them, so sorry, no water here? Just not here anymore.
No, most of the time we look at, if we're going to deepen a well, so if somebody runs out of water, I go out to your property, you have a well, and you say, yeah, my well slowed down to 1.3, and I'm nervous about that. First thing I would do is I pull all the well logs that are around you. And if your well's 150 feet deep and everybody around you is 350 feet deep, I'm just looking at your well and saying, yeah, I would deepen your well. But if your well's 500 feet deep and everybody else is 350 feet deep and they're not having a problem, then we're going to look at that piece of property and probably try to change the geology. Or, you know, we would look around on the piece of property and look if we can get on the other side of a fault zone. There's dowsing that's involved sometimes. There's some scientific stuff they do now where they do sound waves down in the ground. I haven't seen any of that has proven reliable in any way yet, but I'm hoping that someday we can do that. But I haven't seen anything yet, even on big parcels where people spend $10,000, $15,000 to have well sites picked. We're not seeing that they have anything special. I think you could throw a rock and drill where the rock hits and do just as well so far as the technology stuff that's out there for private water wells. But most of the time, to answer your question, most of the time we would deepen a well. That is usually our first thought. based on the other wells in the area. It's just a matter of looking at all of the well logs around you and then making what we think is, an educated decision on and which way is the most cost effective.
All right, does anybody else want to pick Jerry's brain?
I have one more question for the group. As usual, Ryan. Jerry, I'm wondering about water storage, water holding tanks. I know that seems to be a very important issue for fire protection. How do you guys see that in terms of, what your services are?
We do a lot of storage tank systems. That's usually if a well slowed down and it's making a decent amount of water still, but let's say they have a well that used to make 7 or 8 gallons a minute and it slowed down to 3 or 4, but they still want to, water a small patch of lawn and they still want to grow a vegetable garden and that type of thing. We'll put in a 2,500 gallon tank or a 3,000 gallon tank so that while they're sleeping at night, the tank fills up and then, they can operate and not notice the loss of water. 3 gallons a minute, so but right around 4,500 gallons, a little more than 4,500 gallons a day. They're really only using 4 or 5, but when you're using it on your lawn and your dishwasher, everything at the same time, you can catch up with that 3 gallons a minute. And so what you're doing is you're just taking that and putting it into a tank and utilizing it a little bit better. The other good thing about storage tanks that we're seeing this year is that when a well does slow down, people can have that buffer in a storage tank. They can get a water truck in there and fill a storage tank, and then it can last them for weeks and weeks, along with what their well is producing, so that they're still flushing toilets, they're still brushing teeth, they're making coffee, very important, and that type of thing. So the storage tanks are, they're important. They're important for fire, but they make a big difference if you get into a crunch and you can get a water truck out there. There's a number of companies now that haul potable water. So you can go into a storage tank and have certified potable water into your system. So you're not polluting your whole system.
It does protect your well pump to a certain degree, doesn't it?
Gives a well a huge break. So if you have a well that's pumped down on a daily basis and you have your tank filled, all of a sudden that well fills up all the way to the top too, and it gets to sit there for a few days before that tank gets down far enough to where it calls the well for water again. So it gives the well time to recharge, and sometimes a break like that gives a well makes a big difference in a well. One of the biggest, this is a little bit off the subject, but one of the biggest problems with low producing wells, and there's many of them in the county, is when they do run out of water, it's a huge percentage of the time it's a toilet running in the house, and it'll go through their whole storage tank system, and it goes through their well, and then pretty soon they're calling us, my storage tank is empty, my well's not keeping up. And then we get enough water in that storage tank system and check, and you have a leak, and we usually isolate the house, and then the system pumps up and it pressurizes and doesn't lose any pressure. But the minute you open it into the house, you lose pressure again. So then they start looking, and it's almost always the dreaded toilet leak, which is about 1.5 gallons a minute. And it can take, if you have a toilet that leaks for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that's a lot of water that you're pulling out of a low producing well. That's actually probably we come across that at least 2 or 3 times a week this time of year.
Thank you so much for all the wonderful information, Jerry. We really appreciate you.
Sure, not a problem.
Yeah,
Sorry, Jerry,
absolutely.
I have one more question. Now that we're in the era of PSPS events, are you finding more and more customers are seeking to provide solar power to their well pump, or is that something that your company would even be involved in?
We do a lot of solar powered pumps, but mostly people are generators with the PSPSs. The solar powered pumps take a much smaller generator. You can pump 6 gallons a minute from 800 feet with a 2,000 watt generator. So that's very, very, very efficient with a solar pump. Whereas with to pump that kind of water with a conventional pump from that depth, you're talking about a 5,500 watt generator or a 6,000 watt generator, depending on the brand. And but most people go into tanks that have deep wells, and so they're only running a little half horse pump, and so a standard generator systems work really well for that. And most people, I think after the last few years, there's a lot of people have generators at their house. When there's a PSP event, I can hear generators firing up all around us. I have one too, but mine's quiet.
That's a Honda.
It is a Honda.
Okay, well, does anybody else have anything for Jerry? Okay, well, with that, I think you are off the hook, Jerry. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thanks for the information provided. Appreciate it.